I'll share my screen here because I want to talk today about building a rich life and the successes that I've had. So you're probably going to hear too much about me and my work today, but it's the biggest part of my ADHD journey. So I wanted to start off with a question, and that is, what does living a rich life actually mean for you? Is it about money? Is it about success? Is it about something else? Just keep that question top of mind as we go through some stories and tell you a bit about myself. Because I always believed that success and money came really easily to me. Simple examples are things like getting good grades in school. The day my dad took my allowance away from me and I somehow came home with a job just hours later. I was always chosen for sports teams that I tried out to. I had part-time retail jobs when I was younger, and I would ask for promotions and end up in management and head office fairly quickly. And I did really well in law school. But at the same time, I had some challenges. I worked on my schoolwork at the absolute last minute every time. I almost forgot that there was a deadline to apply to university when I was in high school, and I almost missed it. My high school principal actually asked my parents if they had thought about giving me an alarm clock as a graduation present in grade 9 because I was late every day, even though I lived an hour away from the school. Or sorry, not an hour, a block away from the school. I almost got kicked off my high school basketball team for the same reason, for being late. And I had a bit of a false start in my first university degree. I thought somehow that computer science was going to be my friend, and it was not. So it probably shouldn't have come as any surprise when I was diagnosed with ADHD, but that only happened about 3 years ago when I was 44 years old. I did have the opportunity, though, to live the dream. I became a lawyer for sure. And right after I had articled in a small firm, a big Bay Street firm in a small town in Ottawa. And then I articled there and I moved on to be invited to work as an in-house counsel in a big bank in Canada. So that was sort of the coveted role that most lawyers would have loved to have had. And outwardly, for the first years there, I was thriving. I was trusted to give advice and recommendations to the executives. I was in charge of running my portion of board meetings without too much supervision. I was promoted. I was paid well. I got the biggest bonuses in my department. And I was even given these stretch assignments and the ability to travel around to places like Ireland and Chicago to manage teams and put projects in place. And there's always a but, isn't there? So I still got that constructive feedback. Despite my great reviews, there was always these insidious ones that were things like, maybe you should work on your time management, Sarah. Or why don't you get the easy things right? You know, at this point, why isn't your emotional intelligence where we'd like it to be? And a whole bunch of different versions of, you should probably be a little bit more like us and play the game that we're all playing. So naturally, as that was unfolding, those kinds of comments, I also burnt out. And I'm not talking about the kind of burnout that I got after every single project. You know, you work really hard to acquire a company and put things in place, and then all of a sudden, you need a vacation for a week. I'm talking about the last 2 years of my time at the bank. I had 5 different managers. They kept getting fired. They kept moving to new organizations. There was this turnover. There was this style change every time. I had to deal with micromanagers and people who wanted to be completely hands off. None of them staying long enough for me to really get familiar with them. I also started to think, is there really a clear direction in this department that I'm working in? And I'd lost the connection to the purpose that I used to feel with my work. So naturally, and much to the absolute horror and terror of my parents, I decided to quit in late 2014. And I wasn't quitting in the way that they were comfortable with because I wasn't going anywhere else. I was just quitting with nowhere else to go, no other job. And my parents have been brought up with these ideas that, like, you probably should have job security and maybe an income would be nice. And what if you don't have money in your bank account to pay your mortgage next month? But I wasn't as terrified as my parents. I mean, I knew on the one hand that I couldn't have I needed to get out of the place that I was working. And if I were to move on to somewhere else, I would only be able to get there fast enough if I took the same exact job in a different organization. And I would dig in for 2, 3, 5, 10 years, trying to prove myself, trying to do well as the workaholic that I am. And I would never take the time to actually reflect when I knew in my heart that I wanted to do something a little bit different. But I was chatting to a friend and I said this about the money piece of it, speaking of richness. I wasn't worried because I had a bit of savings, but I said, even if I run through my savings, I'm going to be able to find money. I'll do it. If I have a need, I'm going to find it. If I'm dying and, at my last breath and I need money, I'm finding a way, whether it's going back to this job, to the law, or taking a job as a waitress in a restaurant. I had no concerns. And this was me really acknowledging my resourcefulness, my resilience, the fact that I could handle anything that comes my way. But it was also a little bit of this, what's the best that could happen energy after some time not enjoying my job, thinking about what the possibility was if I just left and had a bit more space in my mind. And I was pretty good at the impulsive decision making and behaviors as much as any lawyer who's sort of socialized towards safety, or woman who's socialized to take up less space, or child of immigrants who was told that children are to be seen and not heard, or speak when spoken to, and those kinds of things. But I did take this risky decision and leave. So going back to the richness. So I say in my business that I make ADHD human and profitable. And I use this as a tagline because I want the organizations that I work with and the individuals that really want to understand and unlock neurodivergent potential to know that these are the two focuses that I think they need to keep in mind. Because I've noticed that the stigma and stereotype around ADHD is real. It's the first thing I noticed as I started pitching this business to people. And I have to admit that I had the same type of stereotypes embedded in my mind. When I didn't know that I had ADHD, I also thought it was hyperactive young boys, and I didn't really see the connection to myself. And so by learning about the traits and symptoms of ADHD, I was able to start to notice that the work frustrations, the constructive feedback that I'd received from my managers in the past were really about the fact that I think differently. And the reason that some of the feedback that I received didn't make sense to me is because it didn't align with my values, with my interests, and certainly not with the way that my voice or my mind sort of logically concluded whether or not I should try to be the same as a colleague, for example, in the workplace. And I'm pretty good at staying authentic, even when people are asking me to play the game. But playing the game in the corporate setting really felt like it was necessary in order to succeed, but it ran so counter to my natural programming that it was tough to cope with. I just didn't understand why we were playing the game. I didn't know how to play it, and I certainly didn't know why I would want to be like any of my colleagues. So now I help organizations really with the why of why neuro-inclusion is so important. I'm probably starting with most organizations in their very first steps into this area. Some folks may have had one quick session about autism because it's the thing that they'd heard about before. But when it comes to ADHD, most organizations hadn't really tackled that topic yet. And so I use my stories, these human ones that I'm starting to share with you, to open up how ADHD actually turns up at work, how it manifests, what you might think is a personality trait may actually be someone having a hard time doing things the typical way, and then help them with some tools that they can use to support folks. And in Canada, it's not just that that organizations need to learn what ADHD is, which they absolutely do. It's quite surprising. They also need to understand how many of us are in their midst, especially when we're looking at organizations and businesses that are really fast paced, where the ADHD brain is drawn to all of the excitement and change and urgency and constant upheaval and challenge. And that kind of segues nicely into the idea of, like, the human stories really also not just showing what ADHD looks like, but showing how not supporting ADHD in the workplace is going to hinder personal performance, and it's also going to hinder business goals. Because when we come back to this idea of richness, and at least the financial piece of it, we get to the profitability point. And realistically, companies want to be rich too. So although there are always individuals in big organizations that want the organization to be inclusive just for the sake of doing the right thing, the most compelling reasons to do this work always sort of connect to the bottom line. And so I like to share how profitable it is. And it's a bit cheeky. And sometimes when I say I want to make ADHD profitable, ADHDers kind of get up in arms. Well, we're not here to be commoditized and used for that purpose. But really, when we're at work, the whole point of us is to be profitable for our employers. So there's the kind of obvious savings type profit where there's less turnover if you're meeting my needs. I'm probably more loyal to my organization. I'm committed to my colleagues and the work that I'm doing. And I'm also probably more productive and effective if I'm able to work at my best. And then there's the profit that drives revenue that I think is sometimes more compelling to these organizations. When we put the right, a broad group of brains in the same room to solve problems, we get richer results. We get better products and services that reflect the communities in which we live and work. And so we might be able to reach segments of the market that we wouldn't have otherwise. When we have different brains put onto the right tasks or put in front of the right clients, those different styles and ways of working will attract clients that would otherwise pass our business by. And then the obvious one, I think, that everyone would agree is that when you start to build a reputation as an inclusive workplace that wants to see everybody in the organization thrive, that just makes you more attractive, both for businesses who care about humanity and for individuals and top talent who are looking to join an organization that is like that. So when it comes to richness, again, I've always had, I think, more of a focus on the idea of money and success being the rich piece. But since my diagnosis, it's really been driven home to me in a meaningful way that richness is truly much broader than that. So let me just slice my life up now into a couple of different chapters. We can choose a whole bunch of different ways to look at the various elements of our life, but I've chosen a very simple one. We're going to look at past, present, and future Sarah and talk a little bit more about my journey and what it's meant to me in terms of my rich life. So in my past, as a child especially, I've definitely led a rich life, but it's been fairly independent from the money and success metrics. It's been joy, adventure, exploration, that kind of childlike wonder stuff, that comes from camping with your family and exploring the outdoors, or playing with your neighbors in your neighborhood outside, or the time that my parents took me out of school for a month and we went to Trinidad and to Guyana to meet family and friends. But as an adult, my impulsiveness and my curiosity have really played a huge role in some of the adventures that I've gone on. So let me share a couple of those with you. I did mention that I'm a lawyer and that I went to law school. And I also mentioned that I had a bit of a false start in my first degree. So what I didn't mention to you yet is that although I had a fantastic LSAT score to get admitted, and I was invited by a lot of top schools to apply, when I did, I was rejected. So I didn't get admitted to law school when I initially applied. But I got curious. I wondered what I might have to do to change things for the following year. And I went to the dean of admissions at a school in my town, and I said, can we chat about this? And having a conversation about what I needed to do to get here for next year showed him that I was eager, that I had deep commitment to going to law school. And he said, if someone changes their mind or doesn't show up next week, I can give you a call and invite you to join us. And so the next week I was in law school. And it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't gotten curious and impulsive and gone to see that dean. Next, I am a sports person. So varsity field hockey was my sport in university. But when I was 32 years old, I had some folks who played field hockey say, how would you like to try Aussie rules football? I'd never tried it. I've never played a tackle sport. And I was old in my head at that time. But I jumped on the field anyway. I went to a couple of trainings and had a game after not very long. And the intensity and the focus that I showed on that field actually resulted out of nowhere in an invitation to represent Canada in Australia that summer. Now, I acknowledge all the privilege in the world that I had as a person employed with enough vacation time and funds to go and drop everything to accept this offer. But 2 months later, I was in Australia for 4 full weeks, playing in a world championship, came second place. I was personally named to the world team, so kind of the VIP team of the tournament. And that opportunity also would not have come if I hadn't taken a chance and just said yes to an opportunity. Finally, just a little bit of more what's the best that can happen energy in my life. COVID was here. My husband was restless in his job, and he said, what if I apply to this job in Greenland? And on a whim, I said, absolutely. Let's both move. Let's pack up our lives. During COVID, let's move to another country. And we had the most spectacular 6-month adventure. He worked and I went hiking in the fjords. I made friends with locals and Danish people and Greenlanders. I took Danish lessons and learned to speak quite a lot better. I even got to teach at a local university, a session on cross-cultural communication, which got to show how the Inuit and Canadian Inuit are so similar. So in this case, like looking through all this and past Sarah, even though I had the job and I had like a senior title and the money to allow me to afford these things, the real richness of my past came more from the adventure, the impulse, the experiences that I was able to have when I was younger. Shameless Greenland photos from my living room window in Greenland where I was living. Northern lights every night from January through about April or May. Now, let's get on to chapter 2. So this is present Sarah. And the richness for present Sarah has been very different than the type of richness that I experienced in my past. Now that I have been diagnosed with ADHD, I have a growing sense of alignment between who I actually am and how I operate. So my current work is obviously fueled by this diagnosis. I mean, I wouldn't be talking about ADHD in the workplace if I hadn't discovered my own lived experience and learned about it. It was definitely a huge turning point for me. And my understanding of this condition really impacts my work, but also my social life. Because before my diagnosis, I was running a sole practice now. I'd left my job. I decided just to start my own practice as a lawyer. But I was grasping for motivation. I was working by myself. I was serving entrepreneurs instead of big banks. They cared less about the work and the importance of it. And I was really just forcing my brain to do work that didn't match its most natural strengths. Now, the current version of me who knows that I have ADHD really just understands that I'm different. I see that all the past differences make sense, and I'm not confused anymore about why some things are much harder for me and some things come so much easier. For example, I know that I do not see time in a linear fashion. I wouldn't have even stopped to ponder this in the past. I just assumed everybody saw time the same way. So I'm probably going to be late. I forget elements of my routine leaving. If I'm going to an appointment, I have to remember specifically that I have to go down to the parking garage, come back from the parking garage out of 4 stories, navigate traffic, find parking on the other end. So it's not just a 15-minute drive. I now know that I'm happiest. I know why exactly why I'm happiest leading conversations like these in groups, virtually, on big stages. I know why I actually love sales, surprisingly enough, and why I equally do not like the pre-research of figuring out who I'm going to sell to, or the administrative follow-up once I've started to pitch people in my business. So the understanding of these challenges and gifts that ADHD gives me are why I can see now why I've been successful in the past. And now I'm running my business, working towards all kinds of financial goals, but I'm spending equally or more time and attention on figuring out more about who I am, about what feels right and good in my business, from things like hours of operation. I work from 10 to 4, not 9 to 5. I do work in the evenings quite a bit. How I actually network and sell, whether I prefer to do that in person, what services I offer and how they align with my own unique brain. So my coaching, for example, isn't long-term, it's short-term. So this has been really helpful. And if we look towards the future, understanding those challenges and gifts is equally as important, because I can see now exactly how curiosity is going to fuel my future success. I can envision future Sarah having an extremely meaningful and impactful and financially stable job and career, doing completely aligned work that works for me, especially as an entrepreneur when I have all of that flexibility. And I see the vision is going to be continually unfolding. I'm under no illusions that I won't have to stay flexible, that things aren't going to change and I'm going to have to be creative. You know, hormones are going to change and are changing at this moment. My life is going to change around me and require different things of me and have different executive functions challenged at given times. But I'm so hopeful and confident in my future now. And I'm so blessed to do the work that I do, because honestly, I learn more from the people, or as much at least from the people that I teach and that I speak to, as I do from doing my research. I get to grow and learn and share what my experience is, and then hear from other people. And hopefully some of you will share in the Q&A after I finish speaking, because I like to learn about different ways that ADHD shows up for others, so I can also start to think about how I might need to adjust and calibrate my own assessment of myself. And most importantly, maybe I've realized that late diagnosis, as annoying maybe as it was, doesn't mean that I've missed out, because the best work and my best part of my life is still ahead of me. Now, you might be here today kind of wondering, seeking some clear picture on what your future is going to look like. Whether you are someone who's diagnosed with ADHD or another neurodivergent condition, or if you're just here because you're curious about what your brain might be capable of, or to understand your colleagues, you have a beautiful brain too. And I love you to treat this talk as your permission to start to ask yourself, what's actually the best that can happen? How can you start to build a rich life that's aligned with how you prefer to operate? So coming back to this idea of richness, right? Like, I know that it's very likely that I'm going to be late more often than I would like to be. I'm going to show empathy in my own way and not the way that people always expect me to. I'm going to find getting together a plan for the initial steps of what I'm going to do that day or what task I have to tackle is going to be incredibly hard, probably for most of my life. I'm going to continue to say what I mean, and I'm probably going to be too much for a lot of people some of the time. But the good thing is, as I learn more about myself and my brain, I can communicate my own reality to other people. I can explain it. But more importantly, I understand it for myself, because it's so easy to think that we're the same as others until we can really understand the difference in the traits that we might be experiencing. So I'd love for us to stay curious together. This Neurodiversity Pride Week is a great opportunity to celebrate the beautiful brains that we have. Because I think if we decide together to be curious and stay curious about our brains and about how we can change our lives because we have them, not in spite of them, we'll be able to actually bring our best gifts to bear in the workplace and in our lives. We'll be able to tweak the environments that we work in or live in, including the people that we spend our time with. And we'll be able to adjust the kind of tasks that we take on and the work that we do to suit our own brains. Because I'm clear now more than I've ever been that I'm definitely built for a rich life. And I have a strong feeling that your beautiful brain is built for a rich life too.